Hey, y'all, and welcome to another edition of the Unscripted Huddle, brought to you by the National Football Alliance. The NFA's purpose is to honor, improve, and advance the sport of tackle football. If you're the parent, coach, or administrator of a youth or high school player, you're in the right place. We aim to deliver an authentic voice regarding performance, safety, and the medical truth to support you and your players. My name is John Reagan. With me is Joe Rafter. Let's kick it off.
Welcome back to the Unscripted Huddle, brought to you by the National Football Alliance. My name's Joe Rafter, and we had such an amazing conversation with Dr. Peter Cummings. We decided to split the session into two. So hopefully by now you've heard part one. Now, without any further ado, I'm going to let the part two roll, and we'll get some more wisdom, some more neurological insights, some more discussion from Peter, John, and myself.
Where is the neurological perspective, where does that stand right now as it relates to football?
There are probably more cases of that CTE pattern of staining in a brain in people who have never played a contact sport than there are NFL players. It's been found in infants, it's been found in children. So to say that this is directly related to football is not scientific. We haven't made it there yet. And to kind of take a step back to that 99% paper, you have. I use Alzheimer's disease as an example for this. You have people who have Alzheimer's disease and their families are incredibly generous people who suffer long term through these disease processes, and more often than not, they're willing to donate their brains at the end of life so that scientists can study that to see if we can figure out what causes it and what we can do to treat it and can we prevent it, because we still don't know that yet. So if you go to an Alzheimer's brain bank, so the people who have their brains put in an Alzheimer's brain bank are people who have symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, right? So if I go into an Alzheimer's brain bank and I sample 100 of those brains and I find I find Alzheimer's disease in 99% of them, yeah, no kidding. It's an Alzheimer's brain bank. Right. But what does that tell me about the number of cases of Alzheimer's disease in the general public? It doesn't tell me anything. What does it tell me about the number of new cases developing each year in the general public? Doesn't tell me anything. What does it tell me about the cause of Alzheimer's disease? Doesn't tell me anything, right? So we use these. We can't extrapolate that data into the general public, which is the problem with this 99% paper of the NFL players. We had players who had a cognitive difficulties who donated their brains to be studied, and they found pathology in those brains. No kidding. Right? As you should. Given the way that it breaks down, there's a great correlation between the age of the person and the development of this tau protein and this secondary existence of another neurodegenerative disease with the development of this protein. So you have confounding factors already. Age, other neurodegenerative disease. So we can't make any assumptions about what it is in the general population. Is it a finding? Yeah. Is it interesting? Yeah. Should we follow and study this? Absolutely. Right. Are there people who played football in the 70s, 80s, and 90s that are still continuing to have cognitive and emotional problems today? Yes. But that's probably more a reflection of poor concussion treatment that we had in the 70s and 80s and 90s.
It's also a reflection. It's also a reflection going back to 70s, 80s, and 90s. It was a different game with different technology, different rules. Like my first football helmet was a suspension helmet.
Yeah, the canvas straps and the
canvas straps with plastic, right? Yep. I actually, and before that they were leather. Right? Everybody jokes about that, but those helmets don't exist anymore. I tell the parents of the players that I coach that helmets are like iPhones. You don't have an original iPhone, do you? You don't have a 5 or 8 year old iPhone. No, you got a 2 or 3 year old iPhone. You should have a 2 or 3 year old helmet because the technology is advancing, particularly the guys at Light Helmet. What Nick's doing there.
I got a whole pile of Light helmets on my floor right now.
I got one. I got one on my shelf too.
My kids and my son's kids wearing those helmets as I can throw around. They're the incredible technological advance.
Back to the medical discussion. Like there's bias in the selection, right? If I put 100 apples into a bag and I reach in, what's the chances I'm going to pull out an apple?
Yeah, pretty high.
It's pretty high, right? So there was bias in the samples in that 99% study. It's also studying things that happened 50 years ago
Yep.
that don't happen anymore. The game is not, the rules are different. The helmets are different. The coaching is different, right? And that's a big part of what we're aspiring to do here in the National Football Alliance, is to accelerate the transformation of the game in a medically informed way, such that coaches, mostly youth coaches, learn to, their coaching styles, their techniques, the drills that they run are based on the drills that they played and they were, coached under when they were in grade school and high school, right? So to accelerate that, the coaching developments, and so they can help teach a different game, also bears witness to the fact that those studies from the 70s, 80s, and 90s are old, and the game's just not played that way anymore.
They're going to see a dramatic decrease in the incidence or the discovery of this as time moves on. As we have to do what's called prospective studies. You have to follow people for really long periods of time to understand what diseases are. We can't just take a snapshot. So we're going to see over time all the rule changes, the treatment improvements, equipment developments. We're going to see a whole bunch of changes, and this comes to the big mistake: is correlation is not causation. Right, the number of murders goes up in relationship to the number of ice cream sales. That's just fact. But the ice cream isn't driving people to murder. It's because it's hot outside, right? So we did a study. My graduate student, George Frog, is a great kid, and he overheard a conversation I was having about football equipment. And that we used to use the woodpecker as an example for building all these crazy devices to protect people. And I said, no one's ever even looked at a woodpecker brain. How do we know that they're even normal? So he goes out and he comes back a couple weeks later. He goes, Dr. Cummings, I got 10 woodpecker brains. And I said, George, I don't want to know how you did that because it is illegal to kill a woodpecker. And he's like, no. He went to the Harvard Natural History Museum, the University of Chicago Natural History Museum, and they gave us woodpeckers. And we took the brains out, sent them back to woodpeckers, and we found CTE in woodpeckers. We also took 10 non-pecking birds. Right, and we did not find CTE in the pecking birds. So, that's an interesting little study, but it doesn't tell me what causes it. That I can't say that pecking causes that. I can say it's associated. I can't say it's causation.
Right.
But the only way to do that is to take a bunch of woodpeckers and not let them peck, and a whole bunch of woodpeckers and peck. So association is not causation. And that was a little tongue-in-cheek study we did while I was at BU. Trying to drive that point home of concussion, causation is not, association is not causation. And it was a fun little paper we put out.
So Peter, if we decide to put you on a pedestal here, which you deserve to be on. I don't know about that. I'm a big crime show guy, so you're going to be our expert witness here. And all of us are agreeing that you are an expert, so it can't be argued. But as an expert in the field, as a neuropathologist, what advice would you give me if I had a 10-year-old son who wanted to play football, a 12-year-old daughter that wanted to play football? I mean, just truly for parents as they're making decisions or trying to make decisions, what advice are you giving them, whether it's factual or advice as a parent / neuropathologist?
Yep. And that is the absolute single most important question in my universe, because that's the point, right? And I think I understand that not every parent can speak brain. I'm very lucky. I get to be able to go out there and be able to understand these papers. And so how can I break it down into what I call the elevator pitch? I got 2 sentences to tell you that it's going to be okay. And up to you. But one interesting thing I had happen to me in that line, I had a parent reach out to me and say, doctor, I have great respect for what you've done, your work. I've read everything that you've read or everything that you've written, and I try to understand it, and I'm looking at it, trying to make this decision if I let my son play football, and I just don't feel comfortable with it. What am I doing? What have I got wrong? Where am I wrong? And I said to him, you're not wrong, right? That you're not wrong. You did what you needed to do for your child. You went out, you did the research, you did due diligence, and you made the decision that's best for your family. I can't tell you that's wrong. If you came to that conclusion, I'm not here to convince people to play football, right? I'm not here to drag kids out of the street and force them to play football. If football is not for everybody, it's not for every family. And it's not just the idea of head injury and concussions. It's a rough sport. Right? This is not kitten wrestling. And it's got a 100% injury rate, as do all sports, right? You're going to get bumps and bruises. It's a rough sport, especially as you get older. High school is very rough. Youth football, weeble wobble more or less, but as you hit puberty, hits get harder. And especially in high school football, you get kids who are shaving and kids who are still wearing diapers, right? I mean, that's a big difference. So I'm never here to convince a parent that they should let their kid play football. If somebody has a question, I'll say, look, we don't know what CTE is yet. And this is a quote from Merrill. I still remember, we don't know what causes it, and we don't know what it causes. The chances of somebody developing this disease is very rare, very rare. If you were to say that it does exist as a disease entity, which we haven't established yet, you're talking about less than 1% of the football playing population are even at risk for this disease.
So Pete, just on that, let me interrupt you. Total in the history of the human species, 350 cases of CTE ever diagnosed in the history of the species.
Yeah, and you got to think of, you got 30,000 people that played in the NFL historically, and then the 1 point something million kids that play every year. So if they're saying one of the concerns I get, John, as a question is age of exposure. How young should I let my child play? Right. And a lot of the studies are saying that the risk for having this protein, I hate to call it a disease because it hasn't been established as one yet, this finding of CTE, are people who play 7, 8, 9 years is when your risk goes up. The average career for a kid, 99% of 0.01% of the kids are going to go up and play at a higher level of football. Right. The average career spans, 6 years, 7 years, maybe 4 years of youth, maybe 4 years of high school. It's not a problem with youth sports in high school. Yeah. So there's no relationship between the number of concussions and the development of this disease, the severity of concussions and the development of this disease. There's not any scientific support that's something you need to worry about. What you need to worry about is if you're in the, concussion in football, it seems like it's really common, but it's probably the least common injury that I see in football. And so one of the things I tell them is that that we don't know what causes it. We don't know what it is. I translate the 99% paper and say, look, there's nothing we can glean from that. The important thing to remember is that a concussion is an injury that can be treated just like any other injury, And that and we've had this happen 2 years ago, where if you have a doctor who's telling you to go sit in a dark room, don't play football anymore, you got to find a new doctor. That's dark age medicine. There was one kid I had in high school a year ago, the only kid I ever sent to the emergency room with a concussion. From practice, he deteriorated really quickly, and goes to the ER, and doctor's like, well, you got to stop playing football. No more football. Had a concussion, you're done. You go sit in the dark room for 2 weeks and do nothing. I'm like, that's ludicrous. So you try to educate them and say, look, what are you worried about? What is it about football that you're concerned about? Oh, I'm worried about my kid getting CTE. Then we have that conversation. Well, let's talk about what that is and what that isn't. Right. I'm worried about my kid getting a concussion. Well, let's talk about what that is and what that isn't. And let's talk about some things that you can do to help your child if that happens, and also to help your child maybe prevent it or lessen any symptoms they have. Let's talk about nutrition. Let's talk about sleep. Let's talk about all the different things that factor into our life, like how our brain functions in the world, just general brain health. So that question really is answered with the question, John. You say, well, what are you worried about?
Sure.
I'm just worried about him getting hurt. It looks really rough to me. Well, it's a rough sport.
As a follow-up to this third down that we have here, and maybe just trying to focus in, if there were two things as a parent, you've decided you're going to allow your son to play football. If there were two things that you're going to look for with it, either within that program or the technology, what are the two things, three if it is, but focused in, what would you be looking for to make sure that he's having the best and safest experience?
Yep. And that's prong three, is that after we finish that conversation of what are you worried about, let's answer those questions. And it's just really important, I think, at the youth levels where they're, one of the things, Joe, that we probably, I don't know if we'll get to this on fourth down, but the need for a national governing body and to have some consistency in the way the rules are done and the way the game is played. Make sure your coaches are certified. Make sure they have some type of concussion training. State law now that most coaches have to go through any sport have to go through a concussion training program.
Yep.
Ask the coach about it. Ask the coach what their emergency plan is. Who's their safety officer? These are the 5 questions you want to go ask your coaches. And we have that out there, and we can put that up on our, the NFA website too. We used to have that up in the California. These are the questions you need to go ask your coaches. And if the coaches don't want to answer those questions and they get defensive, you got to find a new program.
Right.
We had a problem here in my son's league. We had double-digit concussions. Joe, remember 2 years ago we had double-digit concussions. Yeah. They're all happening in practice.
Yeah.
What's going on? What's going on in practice?
Coaches have such an influence over the experience that the player has with respect to head safety, right?
Yep.
You got and that goes back to the technology is different, the rules of the game are different, the way the game is coached is different today than it was in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and it needs to continue to evolve. It needs to continue to develop, particularly at the youth level, so that we are teaching techniques that minimize the head in play as much as possible. John, I'll give you a couple thoughts out of the same question. I mentioned earlier that we, number one, we published a document when we walked into the Sacramento offices and we were fighting the ban for football in California. I gave the politicians this document. I had about 50 of these printed out, and I walked through the halls of Sacramento and I handed it to them. As you can see, there's there's 30 tabs here. This is all medical research that we pulled from all over the world, including those who want to ban the sport. Their own research is in this document. This document's posted on our website. So if you go to the nationalfootballalliance.com, you look up the research tab, you'll find every single one of these medical articles are listed there, as you can do your own research as a parent in a place that we're pointing to those that want to ban, as well as those that, the medical journals. So Pete, the favorite article that's in there for me is the article out of the Lancet that, claimed, hey, look, to your point earlier, the people who are talking about CTE need to stop talking about CTE the way they're talking about CTE, because from a medical perspective, they're doing more harm than good. And every single one of these medical doctors, which, as we know, the people who are behind this whole CTE thing are not all medical doctors. They might be PhDs, but they're not medical doctors. Some of them aren't even
scientists. I wouldn't even classify some of them as actually a scientist.
Right.
And if you're having a scientific discussion with someone, and you're not a scientist and you have a different opinion, great, you have a different opinion, but your opinion is wrong.
Yeah.
It's like arguing with my mechanic. I may have an opinion on what that noise is in my car, but if he shows me the broken part, I'm wrong.
So there's research out there that we've published for our community that we're trying to make it easy for parents to get their head around the same exact question. Number one.
Joe, the important thing, I'm sorry to interrupt you, the important thing before I forget it, that this isn't our science versus their science.
Yeah, right.
This is their science. This is what is in your paper.
Right.
And when we showed the California legislators that the line in that one paper that said the findings of this study cannot be used
for policy, to create policy.
And it's like, this is your own paper. How can you possibly stand here and try to get a law passed when your own paper says you can't do that? I mean, this is the story of this,
Totally. So nationalfootballalliance.com, you can find all those articles. They're out there published to make it easy for parents to get their head around some of the content that Pete has shared here. The other thing, Pete, is Dr. Erin Reynolds testified with me in California in front of the Senate Health Committee when we got the law passed. And one of the things that she taught me that I loved, and you've said it here slightly differently, but I'm not afraid of the injury.
Yep.
I'm not afraid of a concussion. I'm not afraid of CTE. I'm not afraid of breaking my leg. These are treatable situations, and they're not reasons to stop or they're absolutely not reasons to not play the sport, right? Yep. They're definitely not reasons to ban the sport. And to your point, Pete, I love what you said. Football's not for everybody. It's not. But for those that it is for, it is life-changing.
Yeah.
it has such a positive effect. John, you and I have had these conversations over and over, right? Wouldn't be the man I am today had I not played the sport and learned from the men who coached me, the guys I played with, and Pete, you talk about it's a physical sport. I mean, there's no better sport in the world to learn how to overcome adversity.
Yep.
None. Right? Bumps and bruises. You always play hurt as a football player. Sometimes
getting
you play
out of bed
injured.
on a Monday morning is sometimes the biggest life lesson you could ever have.
Totally.
You get beat up on Saturday and Friday.
And yet we continue to do it. And yet people do it every day because they love the sport, because the sport speaks to them.
Yep.
Now, and it's not for everybody, and that's okay. But because it's not for everybody doesn't mean that it shouldn't be allowed at all.
Right. And the problem, there's multiple problems with that. And I remember, sitting down with some NFL leadership people and saying, with the flag football is great. I coach flag football. I ran a flag football league, but we're leaving tackle football behind. And, somebody who may have had a commissioner position at the NFL, and I said, what difference does it make? It makes a really big difference. They're not the same sport. And I love flag. And my great nephew's playing flag. We go watch every Sunday. He's just so much fun to watch. And it's the point of flag was to matriculate kids up in tackle football. And we're not teaching that skill. And for USA football to totally abandon us and then go make this an Olympic sport, it should be US flag football. What happens with the kids who need it? And where are they going to go? We saw this happen with COVID. We saw exactly when you ban football, what's going to happen. Increased gun violence, increased gang involvement, increased teen pregnancy, increased drug use, increased depression and suicide. We saw that. We told people that was going to happen in California if you ban the sport. Because this is the only place these kids can go. The tackle football breaks into the top 5. Just the top 5 most popular sports in one income bracket and second poorest. What are we going to do with those kids? This is a socioeconomic issue as much as it is anything else. I had
I when we were going through the California thing, I had coaches emailing and calling me from inner city LA, thanking the work that we were doing to defend the sport and saying, my guys walk past the gangbangers in order to go to practice.
Yeah.
Because the gangbangers are at their doorstep. And if they didn't have practice to go to, they'd be going somewhere else.
Well, who's got great stories about that is Lisa Ertz.
Yeah.
And all the incredible work that Zach and Julie and Lisa did in Philadelphia when Zach was in Philly. And we did some stuff with them with the Jerome Bettis Foundation. We did some great work during COVID to keep football kids moving. That just empowering stuff this is one of the handful of sports where a football coach could literally save a kid's life.
Yeah. Lisa,
just to update you, Peter, the Ertz Family Foundation, even though Zach is not here or is not in Philadelphia, is still doing great work in the city of Philadelphia. I'm going to have to
about that city.
I'm going to have to wrap up third down, gang. All right, here we go.
It's a long drive.
And unfortunately, Peter, fourth down is not going to be national governing body discussion today, although we may bring you back to have that discussion here as we move forward. But we are going to, as we wrap up the year here, we're at December 30th. It's time to start talking a little bit about the new year. And so we are going to, each of us, at least talk about, whether we have picked one or not, our word for the year. Now, I am learning very quickly that I might be the only one that can do things with one word, but I'm going to put Joe on the spot because you've had a little bit of time to think about it first. I'll share mine here eventually, but have you picked your word of the year yet, Joe?
So I have, and I think it's 2 words. It's something I came across. It's something I came across recently.
It's a sentence, John. It's a sentence.
It's not a sentence. It's not a sentence. It's just 2 words. It's 2 words. But just real quick, on the governing body thing, since Pete brought that up, a couple things. The National Football Alliance aspires to be, we declare that we are the greatest advocates for football in America. That's what we're doing. We want to honor and improve and advance this sport so that future generations benefit from the life lessons that it teaches us, like the men on this podcasts here today have learned. The whole concept of governing, I think is a mistake. Honestly, we want to advocate. We don't want to govern. I don't want to. We want to. We aspire to people having football freedoms. You can play. You play 8-man. You can play flag. You can play 11-man. Play the game however you want. And at the same time, there's some no regrets things that you really should be doing. For example, you shouldn't be playing tackle year round. That's not governing. That's just common sense, right? And so AB1, which we passed as the first youth tackle football safety law in the country, in the state of California, creates one common standard across the entire state that whether you're AYF, Pop Warner, or Independent, Snoop Dogg, doesn't matter, you all have to play by a set of safety conditions, which include coaches getting trained in techniques that minimize the head and play. It includes coaches getting CPR, AED, first aid certified, some basic things like that. So for me, Pete, it's not about governing, and I want to make sure I touch on this because I don't want that concept of governing to linger beyond to the next podcast. So I just want to touch that. On my word, easy day. It's an easy day. Every day is an easy day. So my word of the day, my 2 words for 2025, John, is easy day.
Gotcha.
I thought it was going to be advocacy. I thought that was your word. I thought you were going with that.
No.
You got 3 words, John. That's not fair.
At least we got him to explain it that way, though. That was quick. Peter, you want to pop in a word of the day, or are you passing to me? Okay, go ahead.
I got a word of the day, and I use this every day.
Word of the year, I guess. I apologize.
This is the word of. This is my mantra. This is excellence. It's excellence. Yeah. It's a standard, and if you have a standard of excellence for yourself, then you surround yourself with the people that have that same standard of excellence, you will accomplish great things. And I don't care what that is in life. I don't care if it's music. I don't care if it's art. I don't care if it's teaching, law, medicine, football. Set a standard for yourself. Standard of excellence. Don't ever go drop below that, and keep the people around you at that same level. And this philosophy is really an extension of Bill Walsh, this is his book, The Score Takes Care of Itself. You surround yourself with the people with the right dedication to themselves and the right level of standard of excellence. The score takes care of itself. You don't have to worry about the wins and losses go down the same drain. It's a standard. And I see this all the time in professional sports, see it in youth sports, see it in high school sports. If you don't have those people around you, it can destroy a team. It can be one person doesn't meet your level of excellence, can destroy your business. Totally. It can destroy everything. So that's what I try to develop in my son. So I try to develop in the players I have contact with, whether they're professional athletes or not professional athletes, is continuing to evolve a level of excellence that you will not deviate from.
Yeah, it's a standard, not a goal. Love it.
Exactly.
Well, for me, I have a new focus in 2025, and I got involved in this with, obviously, through John Gordon's readings and some of those things, and that's why I have each year said my word of the year is going to be something a little different, just so that it's a focus for that year. There are certain beliefs that I have, and this year's is steadiness. So, I think, and steadiness, as I defined it, is kind of continued or sustained forward movement. I find myself having gotten out of coaching 4 years ago, and after 30 years of coaching, and now in a different season of life, and seeing family members in different seasons of life, trying to find that daily that turns into a weekly, that turns into a monthly rhythm. And as things change dramatically in our lives, I think one of the things I've always prided myself on, hopefully my kids would say I reflect, is being consistent. And so as well as being consistent, also being steady and moving the things in my life forward, not just by pacing things, but also by pushing things to find those new rhythms as new things come along. And probably the biggest part of this for me to stay steady is learning that I got to say no to certain things. and I haven't done a great job with that, as I feel like I have more time having gotten out of coaching. I sometimes overcommit, and I never want to do that where I under deliver. I'd rather just be steady and work through it. So that is my word of the year: steadiness.
To jump off of John, one of the football is also a game of transition, and there's going to be a day where all of us are not going to be involved in the sport anymore. Players are going to hang up the cleats. Coaches are going to put the clipboards away. And that transition is incredibly difficult. And guiding athletes through those transitions and coaches through those transitions is very important. And John, you're not coaching. I haven't coached. I didn't want to. I get to work. I'm really lucky. I get to work with athletes in more of a performance recovery aspect, mental preparedness, mental toughness. Really getting into that aspect of performance. But I don't coach anymore, and I miss drawing up plays. I miss calling play. I miss running practices. I miss being around the teams that, I get to be part of a team in a different capacity, but I'd love that leadership role. I loved coaching. I just find that the more distance I get from my last game that I coached, the harder it is actually. You think it would be easier, and I'm just wondering about you. We're about the same time frame. I find each year I don't miss it less and less. I miss it more and more.
Well, I'll answer your question before I wrap it, but I will say this. There are certain aspects of coaching that I miss significantly. There are, I think the time that I spent at the Division I level of college football, as long as I did, brought in other aspects of coaching that I don't miss even a tiny bit. And the pieces that I miss the most, I still do. I have the time and ability and freedom to train, and because to me, my love for coaching always came from seeing players develop and seeing players succeed, and seeing players set goals, and whether they achieve them or not, work to those goals. So, with a ton of great information, that's going to bring us to the end of a 2-part episode with Peter Cummings. And before we go, Peter, I just wanted to give you a minute to share anything that you wanted to share to kind of wrap things up.
John, pleasure to meet you, and thanks for having me. And Joe, it's always a pleasure, and I'm so grateful to have had you enter my life, and I treasure your friendship and your mentorship and your thoughts and wisdom, and how much I appreciate that. And my big takeaways from this would be, it's easy to be scared. It's hard to become educated on a topic, and I think that the more you know, the less you fear. I think that's what I try to instill in parents. Don't be afraid of concussions; they're treatable. Even far out from a concussion, you can still treat it. Football is a great sport. If your child wants to play it, great. If your child doesn't want to play it, great. But make sure your child is active. Make sure your child is doing something instead of sitting in front of a television playing video games. Sugar and non-moving children and diabetes are doing more injury to our kids than concussions in this country. And make sure your kid is participating in something outside, and they're getting exercise and eating healthy and making good choices with what they put in their eyes, what they put in their ears, and what they put in their mouths.
Awesome. Guys, as I said earlier, I'm to see the two of you here in front of me in this podcast, and to be able to have this conversation with you is a weaving together of so many of different threads of my life, and I feel truly blessed to have both of you in my life. I love you guys, and the work that we do here in the National Football Alliance is making a difference in the world, and that's all that I think we as men. And John, we talked about fathers in previous broadcasts. That's really what we're here to do, is make a difference in the lives of others through the great sport of football. So, guys, love having you here. Pete, I'm sorry, but we're going to have you back. There's too much content, too much too much rich discussion. No, there's so many more different avenues to explore, and the truth is, we've been working together for 6 years, and we're not gonna summarize 6 years of our work together in 2 30-minute segments. So, complete blessing to have you both here. Thanks for being here, and we'll see y'all in the next version of the Unscripted Huddle, brought to you by the National Football Alliance.
Well, that's it for this week. Let's keep the conversation going to help NFA honor, advance, and improve the game of football. Thanks for listening, and join us next time for another set of downs on the Unscripted Huddle.